Hey folks, Rich here at RCINFORMER. Today's video is an assembly guide or building guide of FREEWING's twin 80mm F-14 Tomcat. Once again guys, this is coming from Motion RC. If you guys hadn't seen the prior video, it's an unboxing video where I go into some really extreme detail on all the parts so you guys can see what comes with this airplane. And although it is a pretty complex airplane, it's actually pretty simple to assemble. Now this is one of those planes that really doesn't need an assembly guide so much or a building guide. However, I got two purposes for this video. One is just to show you how easy it is to actually put together such a complex airplane, what a nice job Motion RC's done on this. And two, to kind of give you guys a little bit of guidance and some tips and suggestions on how I'm going to get this thing ready to go and some of the things I'm going to do to it before I fly it. So, and just as we talked about in the last video, you know, you got the main fuselage section, the front fuselage section, the wings and tail surfaces, so you can see it's pretty simple, and then some parts bags and instructions and so forth. So to assemble the plane, again, it's a swing wing F-14 Tomcat, but you really need just basic stuff. A couple screwdrivers, scissors, foam tack maybe, hobby knife. This is just a few I pulled out, and just some 3M blender, you know, just some tape or Scotch tape or something. You may need some of that. I may need a few more things, and I'll get those out as I put these things together. Also guys, everything comes nice from FREEWING. Everything's labeled nicely. You can see, you can find everything in the parts bags, and there's just really you know, probably a few dozen screws to get this thing together, and we're off and rolling. Now in the manual, when you guys go through this, I may touch on this thing from time to time to show you all a few things. This manual is designed for this ARF and also the full-on kit version. So you can see I highlighted the areas that we have to do, like putting on the forward fuselage, the tail sections. But I left out the parts where you have to assemble all the servo boxes and all that kind of stuff, which that stuff's already done. You know, as you can see here, like here, the servos are already mounted in there and everything, so we don't need to do any of those things. Things like the swing wing mechanism, that's already installed in there too. So, and I'll kind of point that out. You can kind of see that way buried in there. You don't have to do any of those things. So again, I just highlighted some of the areas in here, and I'll probably refer to this maybe from time to time. But again, just to show you how simple this is to go together, we're going to kind of just show you. So starting off with the front fuselage section, let's go ahead and get that thing in place. Getting the front half of the fuselage on this airplane, joining the front and the aft half of this thing are really pretty straightforward, folks. It's really just this simple. You apply glue to this area here, this area of the bulkhead, to these sides right here, and then on your front part of the fuselage here, you're going to apply glue to here. Probably foam tack's the way to go, maybe onto these carbon plug-in tubes. And then you literally, it's this simple, folks. You just plug in those two plug-ins down below, you slide this on, and you're pretty much good to go, and that's it. You have a rear battery tray, forward battery tray, each with one strap, which you could add another slot for a strap. And then you have an upper battery right here. It's going to go right in there like that. I'm not sure which way the battery plug-in is going to go. And then you have a second one right up front. And that'll get your CG going. This is the factory recommended scenario. And this is how I'm going to fly it for you guys. I'm going to do it stock so we can kind of see how it just sort of evaluated in stock condition. However, since the plane's been out for 3 years, there have been a lot of guys that have made a lot of modifications, and most guys have been talking about using larger batteries. So what I decided to do to the airplane is I'm just going to fly it stock for everybody. We're going to see how it looks, and then anticipating larger, possibly larger batteries like 5,000, 51, 5500s. It's much easier to make a change, okay, to this thing right now instead of just leaving it stock. It's much easier to make a change now than it is to glue it all together and then later modify the battery compartment. So I've prepared mine actually to handle a larger battery right off the bat. So when I get done using some 4000s and kind of evaluate that and see how it works, what kind of flight time we get out of the airplane with 4000, we can easily go to 5. And here's what I ended up doing, and I'm going to show you this. Gets a little bit complicated, but it's actually very, very simple the way that I did it. First and foremost, I started putting 2 battery straps because I like to fly inverted, keep up foreign relations with everybody else. So I wanted 2 straps per battery, okay? And what I found was I started carving under here just a little bit so I could make another strap actually right here where you guys can see this little area here. I started with this, but as I carved away, I realized that the battery floor came up, okay? And as I pulled that thing off, I realized that they're already from the factory. There's actually, if you look right in there, there's 3 slots right in there, or 3 voids in the foam intended perfectly for 3 straps. So I started cutting these rear straps. Then I realized that, oh, wait a minute, you know, I can actually put an entire floor front to back. And I watched some of the other videos out there. You know, you got the RC Geek out there that did a bunch of stuff with his airplane. You know, he extended his battery compartment and all that. And I figured, well, why don't I just do this right now, get it set up, so in the future when I go to bigger batteries, this is going to be easier to do. So I've prepared this little video, part of the video, to show you guys what I actually did to get it ready, so you can fly it on the 4s. But if you want to go to 5s, 55, 5800s, whatever, you're going to be able to do it. So what you want to do is get your battery, your back deck off, which is really only 4 screws right here, here, and here. Or let me put it here. There's 2 in the back, just loosely holding it on. And then there's the 2 here that are up front, that are up in the front section. So you take your deck off there and just kind of put it aside. You can see your rat's nest here of wires, which is from the factory. It's just secured on here, folks, with 1 screw just to kind of keep it in place. They give you the other screws in a package. Your receiver and everything's all meant to go under here, which I'm probably going to have to run back here. I'm going to put on the side of the batteries. But you see that tray comes off real easy, and all your wires are right here, okay? And I'm going to run all these wherever I need to run them. I'm probably going to have the receiver in the back somewhere, have that all, because there's a lot of space back here, or I'll put them on the sides. We'll figure that out. I'll mess with that later. But what I found was, and again, watching some other videos out there, I found that if I just trim a little bit off of here, and you can see, I'll zoom in here, right here. If I just trimmed a little off of here, and you can see I used a razor knife, and what I mean by razor knife is this kind of thing right here. As you can see, I trimmed a little bit of it off, and what that does is that will actually make this floor, I did a little bit of measuring, it'll make that floor level with this floor right here. And then using the same knife and a creative surgical technique with some of my blades and everything, I went ahead and just for now removed this center block right here and just took it out of the way. Then with, again, using some creativity with a blade, I went ahead and I cut all the way back there, pretty much back to where this aluminum brace is for the swing wing, because that aluminum brace for the swing wing is going to be the rear where the aftmost battery will contact. Because with heavier batteries, you got to shift everything backwards. So I found with that, I could actually make a single battery tray. And you can see I actually fabricated this. I used the existing trays, okay, as patterns, and you don't have to. You can put those straps wherever you want. But what I did was I lined up those strap slots right there with the existing slots in the bottom of the floor. And then I drilled a bunch of holes. I made some lightning holes just to lighten up this wood, because we're going to be losing, you know, we're going to be losing, and let me show you this, we're going to be losing these 2 things right here, these trays, and in the future, and then really just adding a single. So now this thing is actually very easy to assemble. It assembles essentially the same way it did originally, but now I just have a longer floor. Now I'm going to have to glue this all in and get this all in here, but you can see now how nice of an installation this is. It's pretty much factory. And I think as the Motion RC guys see this, I sent this actually off to Alpha so he could take a look at it. But I think this would be a really great way that in the future, if I can get this to slide in smoothly, something sticking, that it'll fit right into place nice and smoothly without any problems. Something's binding on me here. And let me see what I can get, if I can get that something sticking on me. Let's go ahead and get that back in place. We'll get these things lined up. See if I can get them lined up this time. There we go. We'll slide that right in, and there we go. It took a little bit of something was catching on something. But you can see, and I'll go ahead and take this camera off of the mount so you all can see what this thing looks like. You can see now that we have, not only have we made one big battery floor so we can go all the way back to this aluminum area, we have a nice, neat, clean battery floor that's lightened. We now have an extra strap slot, which we don't really need, but we can actually run wires through here now that we have the holes, because we can actually get down in there. But we have 2 straps per battery that we can take the straps in and out easily, because again, we do have holes. I'm going to have to trim these 2 later, but I'm going to leave it that way for stock so I can put bigger batteries in there later. But now we have one nice big battery for it. Now here's the advantage of this. It's very easy to do this, folks. You can just, I fabricated this out of hand. I just drilled it on a drill press, and I cut all these slots with a hobby knife. You want to use not necessarily light plywood because it's a little fragile, but 3-ply plywood, not the 5-ply, because that gets really, really heavy. So, but with one tray here, Now we also have structure to the airplane. So instead of just having two halves that are glued together with just foam here, and the front is maybe a little looser than we'd like it to be, now we have a nice, tough, solid battery floor that joins the two halves together, and it's pretty sweet. It's about 14.5 inches long, front to back, about 89 millimeters wide. But by doing this, we're going to be able to accommodate a whole bunch of batteries. And the batteries that I'm going to probably be using this thing initially is going to be the 4000s. And you can see the 4000s right here. I actually weighed mine, and they're right at 625 grams. Probably the ultimate battery for this, and we'll have to see, that balances weight and size, is going to be this Admiral 5000. You can see I just weighed these in on my scale, guys. 705 grams, so it's a little lighter than they advertise. And then my favorite battery, really sort of all time, is this Roaring Top 5500, because it has a good size and weight, but it starts getting a little bit heavy. Right here it's at 805 grams, okay, and it's a 70C pack. And then the Admiral Carbon 5100s I'll probably run in there also. We'll kind of see how that goes. But those start getting a little bit heavy, but the size is a little different. You see, they're 862 grams. However, the difference is that it's a shorter battery. It's shorter, it's a little wider and a little thicker than like the Roaring Top, for example, and it's Roaring Top 5500, but the Roaring Top's a little bit longer. So you got kind of a mix of batteries and things that you can use here. I can't tell for now, but I'm thinking that the 5000 will ultimately be probably the ultimate battery for the plane, because it gives you a little bit more, for not too much extra weight here. It gives you a little extra weight, but you get an extra, 1000 milliamps. But we'll see how it goes stock, guys. We're going to get this thing going. But essentially, folks, that's how I have mine set up, and it seems to work out really, really nicely. A few notes I have about battery floors in general, and actually the one that I made, is that when these things come from the factory, right in here on this edge, as you can see here, they usually leave this thing squared off. And sometimes when you're adjusting the battery, it binds on that corner. You can see where it grabs that corner. And sometimes I find it hard to rotate the battery or rotate the strap to get the battery in place tight. But you can't get down in there in most cases. But if you have an opportunity and you can get under the battery compartment and then glue it back in, what I like to do to all of mine, and I'll show you right here, is I will round that inside corner that's on the underside of the strap. And you can see by rounding it, it makes the entire thing slide a little easier. Now, some guys might like that bite for the battery, and that's fine. But I prefer to actually, if I get an opportunity, again, to round those inside corners. So when I glue this down in and I need to adjust my battery strap, I can slide it much easier. It also makes it much easier to insert the strap and slide it over without having those two corners to go in. Everything just flows better, and it's just easier to move that thing. Now, before I get this thing in here, what I went ahead and did is I outlined all the areas where no glue is going to go, because there's a void way back in the back there where this doesn't attach to anything. This was meant for the receiver and everything to go under there. So, and I can still put some things under there. I can still cut this open and go in there if I need to and put something down in there like a satellite receiver or something. But where there's no glue, I went ahead and marked it off. And I marked off there because we don't want glue under the straps, because there's just voids back there. And I put all the areas where glue is going to go. And once you do that, I went ahead and rounded all my holes off and everything. But that's just a few tips, guys, for you guys when anytime you're putting in a battery floor or modifying it. Those are a few things I've found that make battery installation a whole lot easier. To install the battery floor I put in there, I think I'm just going to do mine really, guys, in sections. This is really new territory I'm in, but I think it's going to be really hard to glue all this stuff together all at once, the front, the back, the battery floor, especially if you're using contact cement, because it tacks up so fast. So I think what I'm going to do first, you could probably put the front half or the back half on first. It probably doesn't even matter, but I'm going to glue probably here, and I'm going to glue probably halfway here, because this large section that I left right here is actually right where the seam is. I didn't want to put holes right on the seam, because that's where I'm trying to really make this thing a little bit stronger. But I wanted to lighten the thing anyway. But I'll probably put glue up to this line right here. I'll put glue right here. And the first thing I'm going to do probably is just go ahead and, glue this part in place. I'm going to have the straps off it. I don't want to have those things on there while I'm doing this, because you can get glue on the straps and, glue your strap in position. Okay, and make sure this is all secure, make sure it's down in place. And then really, and again, maybe I'll do the front half. I hadn't totally decided yet, but once I get that on there and that's just about dry and in place, then I'll probably glue the second section. I'll put the glue on the bottom of this. I'll put the glue here. And again, I may do it vice versa. I hadn't decided, and I don't think it really matters which order you do it in. And then go ahead and just put the rest of this thing in place, if I can get that to line up. And just get the whole thing on there in two parts. I think doing this all in one thing, especially if you're going to use contact cement like foam tack or something, once you get that stuff out of the bottle, it starts tacking up immediately. So I think if we do two separate sections, it'll go on there fantastic. Now before you start gluing anything together, also make sure you've got all the paint removed, because if you don't have the paint removed, you're going to be gluing paint to paint and your connection's not going to be great. So I always find that packing tape works great. Just stick it on, peel it off, and you can get your paint off that way. Once you get the battery floor glued in place, you're going to want to stand the airplane up. As you can see here, I used a couple of battery boxes. You want to stand it up vertically so it's allowed to dry like this. The reason for that is if you have the plane level, unless you prop up the nose, which you could also do, the nose has a tendency to droop, and it may not make, you know, the best contact or just a right contact right there where you need it. And you do want that nose to go on straight. So you can see here I went ahead and glued this thing pretty much just the way we talked about. I went ahead and I slid the battery compartment straight in, and I went ahead and put the nose right on top of it, and everything just worked like a charm. It's drying right now, and then after the fact I went ahead and took one of the battery straps and just slid it right in there. It's perfect if you have a couple of holes there. You can easily feed it right on through there, and it'll go in pretty nicely. And then just allow this thing to dry. One other tip I have is that if you're gluing this thing in place and you're going to use foam tack to do it, foam tack does tack up very quickly. So you have to work kind of fast. And also I just used like a new bottle, and I used about half of it, and a lot of it was residual. I ended up pulling a lot of it off of it anyway, but foam tack foams up as soon as it touches the air. So you have to get it on fairly quick, and if you're using a new bottle of the stuff, it's about as fluid as it's going to be. And if you have an older bottle that's been sitting around for a while and it's already kind of gummed up, it's going to make it harder to get it all there on time. So you can use whatever kind of glue you guys want to. I did use foam tack and it worked out okay. And as you look kind of close, you can see there's a little bit sticking out all the way around, but for the most part, this thing went on like a charm, and it is just really, really strong. Here's one last look at the battery compartment, a little bit more of a close-up, kind of glued in place, and you can see how nicely it went down. The glue is all dried now and it's all down in place, and I went ahead and put that foam black. I just blocked it, just stuck it right back in there. Again, the purpose for doing all this stuff is to allow myself in the future, or you guys, to use larger batteries in this thing. It's all set up and ready to go, but at the same time I can still run this thing in the stock configuration, just the way it was kind of intended to be. So I'll actually put all those wires back down, and then we're going to get this thing, the rest of this plane set up. I'm not really anticipating too many changes to this airplane. This was really just one area that, it's just become kind of common knowledge all the way around that this plane people are going to want to use larger batteries for, and I'm probably going to end up going that way. But we're going to run it stock for now, again, guys, with the 4,000 milliamp Pro Packs back there. We're going to go in the stock configuration initially, just with the standard battery setup. And then again, when it's time to go to big batteries, all I'm going to have to do is pull this out of here and get that block out of there, and then I can go ahead and I can actually trim more off this depending on the width of the batteries I place in, little at a time, and then I can go ahead and wire up everything. Now down in here with the stock configuration, once again, your receiver and everything's intended to go down in there. I'm probably going to put my receiver and stuff all the way in the back here. We'll kind of see how it goes as I get everything, the rest of this stuff in there. But that is it for the battery tray. And I got to tell you one thing about this thing. When you grab the nose and you try to move this airplane now, there's a solid, now have a solid structural member running front to back that literally makes the front and back of this airplane, they become one with that big floor in there. So anyway, turns out to be a real success, and we will get on with the rest of the assembly. The next step after getting your front fuselage on is your vertical stabilizers and rudders. It's pretty straightforward here, guys. You can kind of even go a little out of order on this if you want to, but you can see there's it shows two connectors on both sides, and 4 screws for each side. But as you can see here, it's a little bit different. There's actually 3 lights, or 2 lights on one side, and then your rudder connection on the left side of the airplane. You can see there's actually two lights in this side. There's only one on the other. It's real simple to put these things on overall. And you can see here that you just want to kind of unwind your wires here and get those out. Again, two on this side, one on the other side. I think early models of the airplane didn't have this notch in here to run your wires. And now I think this is something that was added. So it actually gives you an area to put your wires down. What I would recommend doing with this whole thing is actually using just a little bit of foam tack, simply guys, just for tacking. And what I did is I just put a little dab here, dab here, dab here, just a little bit. You can actually grab this and just pull this, it'll rip right off. But if you can tack your wires in place, it just makes them a whole lot easier to secure and get these things in place without the wires sort of getting in the way. Now the wires are also secured down here with this little tab here, and I don't think that's needed because it actually kind of gets in the way of the vertical stabilizer seating down. So I actually just pulled mine off, and then I'll go ahead and make those connections and get this thing ready to put in. Once your connections are made, you're ready to just go ahead and drop this vertical stabilizer right into place. Now I do suggest before doing that, it's not necessary, you don't have to do this, but if you guys have seen my prior videos, probably other videos out there, I'll usually tighten up my connections with a hobby knife. And you can see right here with these things, they have a little tab right in there, and I'll often just go in there with a hobby knife and grab that little tab and just push down on it and tighten it up. Just push it down very carefully. And all that really does is it takes the female connector, which may be wide open, it kind of makes it a little smaller, so when your male end goes in, it actually has a much tighter fit and you have a better secure connection. So not necessary to do that, but that's something I like to do to all my connections, especially the ones that are buried down in that I can't get to. Make sure that they're real secure. Now, in the prior step, we did remove the top wing deck here, and that literally comes off with 4 screws. But just for just kind of re-edification, there's just 2 screws there, there's one here, there's one here, and for transport it comes off and unleashes the rat nest that we actually already saw. Now what I want to do in this particular case, and what I did already, was to identify, and this is a tip I have, where these 3 wires come out of. And what I really found when I started messing with this was that those 3 wires actually came out of right here. And if you give them a little tug, you can see really which ones it easily pull on. You can see it pulls on there. That's one light wire. I'll grab the other light wire and it pulls down, and then just going to make sure that you have the rudder connection. You see that pulls as well. So what I do with mine usually in this case, since there's such a huge void in here right next to the fan, is if you just kind of pull on those a little bit and then just sort of tuck these down into place there, they'll actually fit nicely in there because there's really not a lot of space under here. And as you pull on those and get those in there, they'll fit just really nicely in position. And then you can go ahead and screw this thing down. Once you're assured that your connectors are in there, and you don't want them going too far in there because you still want to be able to pull them back out and access them if you want to. And you also don't want too much wire hanging out on this end that you have so much extra wire hanging out, because you can tuck some of them back in there. Then you can go ahead and kind of just really easy, just kind of secure this in place. It just drops right down in there nicely. You want a sight under there just to make sure those wires are going in that hole. But this thing has a real nice kind of secure fit overall. As you push this thing down in, it'll kind of lock nicely into place. It'll actually have a little bit of a snap if I remember correctly. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But once you get that down in there it is. It's nice and secure, and you go ahead and secure this thing by, I think it was the 3 by 8 millimeter screws, or 4 3 by 8 millimeter screws, 1 on each side and then 2 right down there. The finished product is simply outstanding. These things fit in fantastic. Once you get the one side in with 4 screws, you go ahead and do the other just the same way. It's real important to note that these connections, when they go in, I'll show you, see if I can show you a picture here. They are a plastic to plastic connection. So when you tighten this down, you really don't have to worry too much about the foam compression. Once that plastic from the top contacts the bottom, it'll make a nice positive lock. You'll feel that screw get tight, and it's a positive lock in place all the way around. Now additionally, once that's in place, your wires here that you pulled out, you can see there's 3 of them on this side, there's 2 of them on this side. There's so much space down in here. You can retuck those back in, and I'll get into securing these wires later. But all of those things will actually tuck nicely back into this space, and then everything can be tie wrapped down, and you don't have anything extra hanging out. And when you put those in, if you don't push them too far in, you can easily get them back out if you need to get in there and service a servo or something like that. But once again, folks, just simply outstanding. These rudders fit fantastic. The next step is to install the Stabilator or the Tailoron here, and that's pretty simple with just a few parts. You can see here I went ahead and assembled one of them already over here, and here's the one with all the parts here. Essentially it just consists of an axle, a wheel collar with a really tiny microscopic screw there. I think it's about 2 millimeters. You slide that in, attach it, and then you have a bell crank with a brass ball, a screw, and a real nice lock nut, and then 2 screws. And you can see here the finished product and how this thing goes together. Once you assemble everything like that, everything is, the Tailorons are ready to be installed right there into the side of the fuselage. The final installation of the stabilizer is pretty straightforward. You can see those 2 notches right there, and then in the background you can see the picture, the way those flat tip screws are intended to kind of fit into those 2 notches. So you can see how easy this thing goes in. It's a little harder than it looks when you're doing this on camera, but there's also 2 screws here. You can see the flat head that's on them, or the flat tip actually that's on them. That's how you can kind of distinguish those screws from the rest. But you can see that those 2 screws will actually go on right here, and you'll feel that they bite down in. One thing is when you install this, it's really important to make sure that this screw right here, which you can see here, doesn't get turned. And you can see as I turn that axle right here back and forth, you can see that if you don't have it perpendicular, okay, to the surface, that it could end up binding or locking it, because it'll actually stop at that screw. Now there's plenty of travel here, but you got to make sure that as you tighten these 2 screws where my thumb is, that it doesn't rotate this thing around and get it in a position where maybe it's in one direction, so you're limited on your elevator travel. So now on the other side of the airplane, I have this thing completely installed. You can kind of see how this thing just goes into place here. And you can see how my screw is sitting pointing straight up. So it's really not limited by the amount of travel when it hits that plastic. Push rod goes into place real easy. It just snaps in. You use the 3rd hole, and you can see as per the instructions right here. They do show you for all your surfaces which hole to use. So, and for the purposes of the elevator, you don't really need that much throw. So they're calling for the 3rd hole. But anyway, guys, that's pretty much it for getting your stabilizer in place. The last major sub-assembly is to get the your wing sweep mechanism in place. You can see here where they show you just really remove the nut and the screw, one screw that's holding it in place. And then you have a couple washers here to put on with your wing. One goes on, wing goes on, then another washer, and then you put this plate on top, 4 screws and a large nut. And then once that's done, you put your push rod in place. It has 2 giant ball links and 3 millimeter metric nuts. And then you can set the sweep and make sure everything's set in place. And they show you some clearance issues here and stuff. And then you have a cross beam here, a support brace that you put on there for the main wing. And then the rest of it's mostly cosmetic stuff. So anyway, here's what it all looks like, guys. And you got you can see all the wires here, and it is a good time really to actually power the airplane up. And there is one of these wires right here that actually has the BEC connected to it, and that's really the only one you need to connect. And this is how it comes in the boxes with this little packing foam on here once you take the top deck off. It looks more complicated, all this spaghetti, all this mess. It looks more complicated than it really is. It's actually pretty simple. You have aileron, elevator, rudder, throttle, flaps, gear, and a swing wing, and it's pretty simple. So it just looks complicated. I'm going to take this off the mount here, guys, the camera, and I'm going to kind of move it around a little and show you guys a couple little things. I got it all powered up. You can kind of see all the lights working and stuff. I'll kind of get back here a little bit, and you can see your 2 fuselage lights there, your tail lights working, wingtip light, everything's plugged in, and you can see what it looks like before we assemble it out of the box on this side. And then we can go to this side and we can see what it looks like assembled after. And you can see all those screws and the cross member here and your wing sweep stuck on there. And again, the reason I plugged all this in now is to make sure everything's working right. And I got my radio set up. You can see I went ahead and labeled it Tomcat. And I went ahead and assigned a switch. For now, I assigned the swing wing to this switch right here. And you can see as I flip the switch, we can see how nicely the mechanism works. I set up the switch forward for forward sweep, back for back sweep, and it's a switch that I can really easily get to just right above the main control stick. So right out of the box, guys, it works flawlessly. You can see this little area that's all cut away. That was done at the factory. It just kind of came like that, and I'm assuming they did that because it was probably scraping on a test wing that they put on there or something. So they scraped that up to get that to fit. And actually right down here, I actually did a little sanding on this carbon rod here because mine was actually scraping. I did a quick test fit of it beforehand. And we'll actually show you how easy that thing goes in place. So now you can do some of these sub-assemblies in in whatever order you want. I just put the tailerons on this plane in the last couple shots there. So, you know, and the reason I took them off is because it gets kind of a pain to move this plane around with the tails on there, and the tails are a little fragile. So you can do some of these as sub-assemblies in whatever order you want. I actually filmed them in reverse order. But anyway, I'll go ahead and sweep that wing back, get that back into place, and then let's go ahead step by step into getting this wing on. The first thing we're going to do really is just to remove this packing tape and foam here that really just kind of protects that top deck on the airplane for transport. Then we're going to get this large nut off. That's the main area where the swing wing pivots off of. We're going to take this whole plate, that one screw off. I'm going to drop this stuff off right here. And then I'll take the wing here. This all comes tied up here, folks, so you just got to untie it. It's in sort of a little bit of a loose knot. That's all your wires for your flaps. It's the wires for your aileron and also for your wingtip light. And then you got two washers here to use. One's kind of bigger and one's kind of smaller, as you can probably see here. Put the larger one on right here, and you just put your wires here. Just get your ball link sort of out of the way here a little bit. And then you just kind of slide this wing down into place. And then it kind of fits right down there nice and tight. It should seat there pretty well. You throw the small washer on, and you know, that's about it. You put the top plate back on. We'll go ahead and get that in place here. And we'll get these things all screwed down. You tighten that up. You put these 4 screws in right here. And you put your main nut on. We'll get these all in place here one by one. And then we'll move on. There's 5 of these things you got to get in place. Let me find that last one. Once you tighten these things down, then we move on and we put on the ball linkage for the main swing wing drive. Now that we've got all 4 of these screws tightened and the main nut tightened, I used a hex driver for that. And notice I left this 5th one still loose. The next thing we got to do is take this 14 millimeter 3 millimeter screw by 3, and then we've got to put the main push rod here to drive our wing open and close. Now you may have to turn these ball links a little bit, make the rod a little longer, a little shorter to make this thing fit in. But there are machine threads down in there to screw that into, and this is what's going to actually drive the wing forward and back. And we get that tightened up. You can put thread lock in it probably a little bit later if you want to use some at all. I don't know if it really needs it, but we may have to adjust the length of this rod later to set the forward travel limit and the rear travel limit of the wing if it's not quite where it needs to be, because you got to make sure both of them are even. And then we can remove that 5th screw that we were talking about and put our cross brace, our kind of support beam in there. Put that screw back in. Tighten it up, make sure that thing's in the notch, or at least get it partially in there. And then the one that we're putting up front here, that's actually a self-tapping. That's actually going to go into plastic. So these aren't going to be things probably that we're going to remove hardly at all. I'll try and reach from the top here and get this in here. Kind of a pain doing this with the camera. So, but we'll get that tightened down in there. It has a big washer head on it, big pan head. So we'll get that going down in there. See how far in that goes. That's a pretty secure actually connection right there. Yeah, that went in there real nice. And then follow it up with our beam here. Make sure this one's in there nice and tight. So it's a real nice forward and aft support beam. And then that's pretty much it, guys. That is it for getting your swing wing on. It's in place. So now we got to set it. Got to make all of our connections here. Just plug everything to where it goes. It's pretty straightforward how these plug in. Most of them go right into this board, and everything's labeled real nicely. So, and then we can go ahead and get the swing wing set and get both of them working. Get both of them working and moving the same travel. Now that all my connections are made, we're ready to just kind of do a test of the wing sweep mechanism. The 2 things I did not connect the landing gear because I really don't want that coming down just yet, and the flaps, and you can see why. The flaps, if by accident you extend them, you drop them down, and you sweep your wings, you get those flaps caught and jammed, and that can jam up a wing. So for now, while I'm setting it up, I just left the flaps alone so I don't run into that snag. during the setup process. So, but here you go, guys. I went ahead and I set my wing sweep on this switch right here, forward for forward and back for back. It seems to be an easy switch to get to. And right out of the box, this thing travels perfectly. You want to make sure both wings travel at the same speed and that they both retract, they both sweep to the same angle, and that when they come forward, they both come to the forward stop and lock in place. So the forward stop, the point where this plastic piece right here touches, is actually this pin right here. This screw goes into that little metal rod, the aluminum kind of standoff right there, and when it touches that standoff, that's the forward limit. This screw right here is your rear limit. When it touches that standoff, and they don't quite touch, it kind of meets up or kind of doesn't quite go stop to stop. But those are your forward travel limit and your rear travel limit, and mechanically, that's as far as it goes. So, but right out of the box, guys, that is your wing sweep mechanism installed and working perfectly. Now that we got the whole tail section in place, the wings are on and everything's sort of plugged in and working, it's now time to get to make sure all the wires are properly arranged. And I'll show you kind of how I did mine. Everything pretty much is stock. I really didn't change too much of this. One thing I did change is there were 6 wires here, and you can see where those things all plug in right over here for your aileron, elevator, rudder, flaps, swept wing, and gear, and those go straight, you can see here, right into the receiver. It's actually a pretty simple wiring system. And these were set up with long wires because all this stuff was intended to actually go all the way up here into this compartment under the battery. But since most of us are going to be using this front section here for larger batteries, I figured I didn't need all this spaghetti of wires here. And I went ahead and got these male-to-male connectors from Motion RC. They sell them for about 39 cents each, which is kind of nice. And it really gets rid of the mess of wires that's here. It makes it look a lot less complicated. You can see just everything is stock where it was. I didn't change anything. I really just bundled this stuff up. And I did reroute these wires. You do want to make sure your wires are routed properly so that when the wing extends, they move outward and none of these get bound. Like we just talked about, there are 2 wing stops. One wing stop, and I'm going to get close on it, is actually this metal standoff that's connected to this screw right here. So it taps. You can see right here where that wing actually stops, and I'll get close on it. It stops right on that metal rod right there. And on the forward swing, when it swings forward, you can see the marks right here where it touches this standoff right here. So that's the forward stop, which is right there on that screw, just like we talked about. That's the rear stop right there on that screw on those 2 standoffs. And you can see both sides start leaving marks. You can see right here, that's the mark of the forward stop right there. But you can see everything's neatly wired. Once again, you can see this wing here. I went ahead and wired mine around here. So as the wings sweep, it's actually going to stretch those wires and pull them. But everything's still pretty much secure. The landing gear wire comes up through here. Your other wires, ailerons, flaps, and lights all come through here and pretty much go right to where they're plugged in. This control board is actually pretty nice. It's organized real well, and I really didn't change really anything other than just the length of these 6 wires. And that's how easy this thing really is to wire. It looks complicated at first, but it really isn't. It's designed to be so simple with just aileron, elevator, rudder, flaps, swing wing, and gear going straight into your receiver, and you're good to go. The one thing I did split up is I did take my nose wheel steering wire, and instead of going into the board, which I think was right in here somewhere, it might have been right here, I don't remember, but I put that right into another auxiliary channel. So I split up my rudders, my nose wheel steering, so I have my nose wheel steering on a knob so I can kind of trim that. But anyway, you can see how neat and clean this is. This is all stock configuration. Also, because my receiver is back here, I went ahead and wired these right here using the Admiral 10-channel receiver. You can see my 2 antennas are just sitting there 90 degrees to each other, and they're away from pretty much everything. I taped them down just with some Scotch tape. My auxiliary receiver, I ran that wire because the one that Motion RC provides has a pretty long wire on it, so you can put it, you want to try and get them as far away as you can. You can see I got one wire wired right there, and I have one wire wired down here. They're just taped down. You can see that one taped down to the floorboard way down in there, and it's pretty secure down in there. That's probably one wire that I will have to move when I use longer batteries. And then of course you can see the finished battery compartment right here. I went ahead and used double-sided Scotch tape, folks. I run double-sided Scotch tape along the floorboards here, and I'm leaving this in the stock configuration so you guys can see how this thing flies, so I can see how it flies, just in the stock configuration with the stock battery compartment in. So double-sided Scotch tape, put some shelf liner down there, and you can see how nicely it all just stays down there. And you can see I did add an additional strap slot right there, so I got 2 straps here. So with the assistance of the FMS straps here, we're going to have 2 battery straps per battery. I just don't really trust one for level flight. It's probably fine, but you don't need any Velcro if you've got some good sticky shelf liner down there. The battery won't slide at all. And then a couple other parts that I just added to the plane. This is stuff you want to do last. Looks like maybe an angle attack indicator or air temperature probe, a couple of pitot tube probes and so forth. And same on this side. This may be a temperature probe or angle attack or something. I'm not sure what that is. A couple pitot tube probes on the side. And then here's your remaining parts. You got the back deck right here. You got your ventral fins, which I'm going to show you a little trick for that. Your front section here, which actually I believe that this is intended to be for cooling. You see how they left that open? I think originally it had a lens there, and you can see that it's got a little scoop there, and on the front end you can see that hole clear down there. So when we go to install this thing underneath, you can see that this thing, this little back piece, acts as a, let's see if I get that to focus on there, acts as a catch for the landing gear doors. So that's actually going to go kind of right in there. And then this whole thing's going to pop up in there. That's going to help keep the gear doors open, but you now have air going into that, and that is some sort of a tracking, probably a target tracking pod or something, but it's designed to pull in air and bring it in through here so you get air into the battery compartment. So that's going to be real easy to put on there. We'll get that in place. And then of course your nose cone, which is pretty sweet. This came right out of the box like this. Installing this is pretty straightforward. You just kind of put it right on there, and it magnets in place, and that is it. You got it on. You can take it off for transport, which I probably will. One other thing I noticed too is that they did make the pitot tube up front here. They made it flexible, so when you walk by it, you don't break the darn thing off. So anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at getting the rest of the stuff on. There is just this one other piece here. This is for getting the back deck here. Your sweep wing barrel geometry sweep cover on. That covers over, and this piece is going to glue down into here. Now I did put a piece of wood across here that's not permanently glued in place. I just stuck it there as a spreader because I found when I put this thing on it wasn't quite going edge to edge, so I wanted to widen it so as I glue it in I'll keep it spread apart like that, and then that piece of wood just kind of slides out. And then of course in the future when we go to larger batteries, like we talked about before, this whole block actually slides out. I'm just leaving it in there, and I'm kind of trying to set this up again in a stock configuration so we can really see how this plane flies stock before we make any real changes to it and add bigger batteries. But now, because we have that larger tray in there, we can go ahead and as we want to use bigger batteries, when we want to, we can pull this foam block out of there for evaluation purposes. We can trim off as much foam as we want off of this whole thing. And then we can go ahead and we can get a bigger battery that's going to slide all the way in there, larger battery, and go all the way to this metal bulkhead. But again, we're just setting it up for right now, guys, in the stock configuration. I went ahead and powered everything up, and now it's a good time to make sure that everything is working. Your ailerons, elevator, rudder, everything's working the way, swing wing, landing gear, all that stuff. I have started to put a throttle kill in everything. I use this red switch here. I went ahead and put some fuel tubing around there as my throttle cut. A lot of people have been suggesting that. Usually it's caused me more problems than anything else. However, you do want to pick a switch that you don't use very often, and I hardly use this switch at all. And you can see right now my throttle's dead because you don't want this thing flying off the bench while you're working with it. I tend to hold my radio in a position like this, and I balance on that. I never use that switch. So that's my up position and my on position. You can see my throttle's working, and my last 2 clicks, those kill the throttle. So that means I can safely mess with this thing on the bench, especially when you have a propeller. You really don't want to have that thing hot, and I'm starting to put those on there. I've clearly identified it with this red fuel tubing or red heat shrink wrap, and I'm trying to standardize that on all my radios in this exact same position, so I have that same switch on every radio. You want to make sure it is a switch that, the button's not a bad idea, but we're looking at the button, I can't really tell whether or not it's on or off. With this one, I can also visually, just by looking at it, I know the position that that's the off position, because I always fly with it up here. So anyway, that's it for the throttle kill stuff. Now it's time to take a look at the airplane and everything that's working. We're going to take a quick look at the landing gear here. I went ahead and I always put my landing gear on the same switch so everything's nice and standardized. And I'm going to go ahead and put the landing gear down. You can see how nicely this thing works just coming out of the box. All right, and that's touching the, it's all coming down nice, and my phone block is a little bit tight, but everything here seems to work perfectly coming right out of the box. Again, one of the reasons I use the 10-channel receiver for this airplane is so I can trim my nose wheel steering, and we'll take a look at that. I can trim it with this trim knob as I'm taxiing down the runway, so the plane tracks real straight. And at the same time, I can still steer my rudder, okay, and my my nose wheel steering with the stick. So we'll go ahead and put the gear back up, make sure that's all working nice, and mine's working flawlessly out of the box. I haven't really had to touch anything. It's working pretty supremely. So now that we go back, now let's go ahead and go back up top and take a look at the swing wing. A couple things that are important to note. Like we just talked about with the stops and so forth, I'm going to go ahead and extend the wing here so you can see how this wiring works. You can see how I have my wire running around that metal standoff. The landing gear wire just comes up from that hole in the bottom, but your aileron, your flap, your light wire, they all come in through here. And as I extend the wing right here, you can see that you got to leave that room some slack. So when you extend the wing fully, it's not too tight, but there's not too much slack either, because one thing you don't want to happen is you don't want that thing to pinch up against, you can see this mark here where the wing actually comes up against this metal standoff, because that's the rear travel limit, and that's where it locks up against. So I'll go ahead and retract the wings or swing them back, and you can see how nicely those wires feed right in there. Both of them work just fantastic. I'll go ahead and extend it again so you can see both of them. Get the correct switch here, and you can see they all work perfectly and no wires bind. Everything is just working perfectly. Now, one thing I did do is when I fully retract, when I was setting all this stuff up, when I fully retract the wings, they have an aft travel, and you can see they go all the way to the back stop here. You want to make sure they're all the way at the back stop, and you can see what I did is I drew a pencil line. You can kind of see it right on that back deck. You see that pencil line? The reason I did that with the wings fully back, I drew a line on both sides, and I'll extend the wings again, is so you know where you can put wires and where you can't put wires. You can see that line right there. You need to make sure everything is on the inside part of that line, or you might crunch something or bend something. Also, the next thing we're putting on is the wing deck here, or the wing cover, the swept wing cover. And you have 6 screws for that. You've got one here. These are your 2 forwards, one there and one right here. You've got your 2 aft ones. That's pretty self-explanatory, and those are actually wood down in there. So once you tap your screw into there, you want to put a little CA in there. Let it get into the wood so it makes those threads a little tougher. Let that dry, and then you'll have tougher threads. And then you have your center 2, which are right here. You also have to make sure those are clear. I went ahead, I put some neon tape around there just so I know where those are, and I made sure that all my wires were kept away from those holes. So that way everything fits in there nice and neatly. So with that, guys, let's go ahead and get this, this back deck in place. When you're putting your swing wing hatch cover on, your canopy latch right here, and your canopy, I have found that I had to test fit it a couple times. It's good to do all 3 together to make sure that they all fit properly. So a couple things to note here. There is an antenna detail that just goes on there. That's one of the extra parts, just like the pitot tubes we put on. Foam tack is the way to go for that, because it does stay flexible and it's pretty strong. And then also, you can see the underside of this thing. I think they've updated this a lot since the original factory version. You can see they've put all these recesses in here, and made it more accommodating to all of the metal pieces and everything. So it really kind of fits more like a glove now. It's in real nice shape. And also it's important to know your two standoffs, your two center posts. Those are the ones that are going to go right here where I put the neon tape on there, so I could identify those spots easy and always make sure that there's no wires rolling over there, so we don't pinch them down or anything and cause a short. So what I found is I put the back in first, seems to go in a little better, and then you slide this on, and really just right from the factory I haven't done any shaving or trimming or tweaking or anything to this thing, and it all fit on perfectly right out of the box. And as you clamp this down, it's important to note I put the 4 outer ones in first, and then this one, as you tighten these, it adjusts the height of this thing right here. You can see it going up and down, and all that matters because you want to go ahead and put your canopy on next. And before installing this piece, make sure it all fits in here. Now, a couple things to note about all this as you do this. I did on mine add, and I'll try and zoom in there if I can get this close, I'm doing this reverse. I added a little bit of a quarter piece of carbon tube, a quarter radius. And the reason that I did that, if I can get that close to the camera, is so it acts a little bit like a ramp. So when you push this down onto that pin, it helps slide the pin in a little better. These are starting to get more prevalent, but there wasn't one on here, so I added that just to sort of ease that. But if you put this foam block in here, or the foam canopy latch, and again, the reason I put this piece of wood here, it's not glued in place. It's literally just acting as a temporary spreader to install this thing, because I found when I put this thing in, it wasn't wide enough, and yours may be different. I mean, some of these are all a little bit different coming out of the box, so, but I felt like I needed that spreader in there to sort of keep this thing going on, or to keep it going side to side. And then when you install this, get your top canopy on, your main canopy. You want to pull back on this thing, and this little antenna is actually good if you foam tack it in place. It's pretty strong to take off and remove this canopy. I'm going to pull the slide latch back and make sure it pops into place. Then, with these screws all tightened down, your 4 main screws on the corners, these 2 and then these 2, then you can kind of get an idea with this thing glued in place what kind of height you're going to need, and is this going to match. Now, I needed to actually sand just a teeny tiny bit on the bottom of this thing to make it fit better. So, but this, if you do this all together in one kind of motion, and I know the instruction manual doesn't really talk much about this, if you get these together in one swift motion, get your, or at least fit them this way, get your 4 corner type screws on, and then you tighten down your middle, you can see that you can get this to the point where you have a nice even seam and everything will fit perfectly. If you don't kind of do this all together, you'll get kind of a, maybe a not great fit here, but it'll still fit, but it'll be a lot nicer if you sort of glue this all together. So my next step, we're just going to go ahead and glue this in place, make sure everything's in there, and then we'll be ready to secure everything down. You can see here the final fit of the canopy latch bulkhead here, where this thing really fits nicely into place. All the seams are really nice. When we go ahead and we screw these last screws in place here, the center screws anyway, they're a little longer than the other ones were, I think almost twice as long. And as you screw those down, you can see what happens with this seam. It gets lower and lower and lower till it's actually lines right up, and that's how you can adjust that angle. After putting this thing in place, you can see how nicely, grabbing onto this antenna, because I foam tacked that antenna in place, this thing comes up real nice and it's in place. Now my glue is actually still drying, and this little wood piece that we stuck in there, I'll be able to slide that right out and I'll have a nice hatch in there. But it made sure that this thing really went completely side to side, and you can see what a nice overall fit we have, the way that this goes in. It's an interesting way this canopy goes in. Slide your latch back, push that in place, and it will all settle down really nice and latch in. And again, you'll be able to adjust these 2 screws and get that down so you have a really nice uniform finish all the way across there. So if you do this at once, you'll get a very nice fit and finish out of this thing. Here's a final look at the final installation of the swing wing cover. You can see that all the seams are fairly tight all the way around. You want to make sure that it's down and secure enough but not over tightened or anything. And there's just the 6 screws. Again, these 2, and then those 2. One thing you do want to check, I got this thing all plugged in and everything, is just to make sure you don't have too much excessive rubbing anywhere. And if you do want to make your fit pretty tight, which you can, remember guys, this is just foam, okay? It does flex. So I actually pulled mine off. Mine was a little wider before. I actually pulled the cover off and I took this little edge, because it's very thin foam right here. You can see how it bends. And I literally just kind of massaged it and just kind of bent it down and made a little tighter fit out of it. You don't want it to rub, you don't want it to scrape, you don't want it to bind up or impede the movement of the wing at all. But you do want to have it kind of tight. If you have too big of a gap, you know, then you just kind of, you can clean that up just by bending it a bit. And we'll take a look at how that works when we extend the wings. You want to try it a few times, cycle it, make sure nothing's binding. And you can see how it gets a little bit tighter right here, and it gets a little looser there. But that's pretty normal. But again, you got lots of play here. You can really flex and move this around and just sort of bend it down and get it to work. And again, just make sure top and bottom, it's got plenty of movement all the way around. Once this thing flies, you know, this wing is going to be under some load, so this is going to come up a bit too. So again, you don't want it to be too tight, but again, you've got some room to play there. And mine's pretty much out of the box. Again, with just a little bit of flexing down of that thing, it actually is a pretty nice tight finish all the way around, and it should really fit well. Now, while I'm up here, there's one more little comment I was going to make about this battery area here. Only one of these wires, okay, has the BEC attached to it, and that's the first connection that you make. And also, they're soldered right here at the connector, so you don't want to be tugging on that solder joint, because the more you move that, because you're going to be pulling these two apart, you're going to end up breaking that off. So I took some Gorilla Tape, and you can use really whatever you want, but I would wrap something around this so you're not constantly tugging on these BEC wires that way and break off, because once you lose one of those wires, that's sayonara for power to the receiver, and the airplane goes down. So because you're going to be handling this so much, I'd put something around here as a grip that gets the load off of that solder joint right in there. But overall, guys, really nice fit and finish overall. The last part of assembly of the Tomcat is really just gluing these two ventral fins on, and that is it. You're pretty much done. So minus the magnets, which you can disregard those magnets there. That was my ill-fated botched attempt to make these things removable. All you have to do is glue these in place. Foam tack always is the way to go for all the pitot tubes, all the little plastic parts, all the different things you've gone on. Foam tack's always the way to go. It's the toughest and it's flexible. But you glue this thing on here, put some down in the notch, and you go ahead and you install it. You get it in place, and you are done. That's all you have to do. However, I transport my airplanes a lot, sometimes 15 to 20 airplanes at a time to some of the major shows. And the bottom of this airplane, the two engine nacelles are beautifully flat, and this airplane transports beautifully on its belly until you put the ventral fins on, and then you're kind of screwed, so you can't really sit it here. So I just wanted to make mine removable, and I thought I'd show you guys how I did this on mine. Now you can remove this. There's two screws here, there's one screw right down here, and this whole hatch comes off to get to your metal fan, and it's pretty darn easy to do. But I'll show you here what I did to mine. As I zoom in on this one, you can see the difference here. I went ahead and used the missile rail setup here for getting these on, and I modified this to fit. So now I could literally just go right down there. I made a hole in here and attach this thing and slid this thing in, and it's perfect. So if this is something you want to do to make your plane more easily transportable, so you don't have to glue these things in permanently in place, it's the weapons attachment hardware. This is the item number. It's for the 90mm F-16, but these are also the parts used for the missiles on this airplane as well. And you can see how I modified these parts. I didn't change anything with this part. I literally just cut slots. I put that in there, measured it so it would fit in. I did do a little tiny bit of modifying, as you'll see here, just to the plastic right here, which you'll see right here. And right here, I used I used a Dremel tool to carve that out and get that to fit flush in there. I haven't even glued it in yet. You put that in with contact cement. Again, use your foam tack, guys. It's the toughest stuff to get that thing on there. And then you can see the amount of modification that I made here, and we'll see if we can zoom in on this thing. The amount of modification I made to this part. Now, you don't have to trim all of this away, but using a diamond bit, okay, and a cutting wheel from a Dremel tool, I literally just cut that flange off. I recessed this, and then I cut a slot down here, and you can see how much I modified this thing. I kind of cut it down quite a bit in both directions. but that will glue right into place. I'll probably CA this because plastic to wood is going to be a really nice contact for that. And you want to pre-measure it ahead of time so you know how forward and how far back this thing is. But you can see how nicely this thing goes right into place. It slides back. Once it's glued in, it'll be really solid. But now you have a removable ventral fin instead of one that's stuck. So it took a little time to do that, a little bit of creative surgery to do that. But you can see that thing works like a charm. And now I can transport the plane on the belly because this thing does have a huge, big old flat belly that it sits on nicely. And these things you can just stick in the canopy. Just put them in a bag, put them in the canopy up front, so when you transport the plane, you'll always have the ventral fins with it. So anyway, guys, this thing worked beautifully. Now, for those of you that might want to take your ventral fins to the next level like I did, you can see right here, I'll pull this one off. As I push this forward, it's in there pretty tough, pretty tight. I also added a pin up here and a little slot here, and I'll get that a little closer to the camera. Essentially, all I did was just add a pin up here. I drilled a hole through here and CA'd that in place. These little missile rail holders here, once you CA these in place, and I used some medium CA for that, and when I dug that trench, I used the same diamond bit that you can see right here. It's a very thin diamond bit to cut that trench through there. I used that exact same bit here to drill this slot in here. You can see right here, very simply just cut straight down on that thing. And you'll also have to take the cover here off, and that will allow you to get inside here and cut through the plastic that's in there as well. But by making that trench in there, it makes it really much more rugged of a fin. As you can see, as I put this thing on here and push this thing down and pull it down, that additional pin adds a lot of strength up here. So you now have a really tough ventral fin. Now, none of this is necessary, guys. Again, you can just glue these things in place, but by adding that pin up front, it really makes these ventral fins both rugged, okay, and really removable. You can see how nice these things come off. Just sliding that forward and you have a nice pin. So again, these I'll bag, I'll throw them in the canopy, and that's how I'll transport it around. And it'll allow me to have removable ventral fins. I could transport things on this thing on the belly, and also I got really tough ventral fins now for flight. One last tip I have for everybody. If you guys have seen my videos before, you know that I do this. I put foam tack on all my E-rings. You don't have to put them on all the E-rings, just put them on the E-rings that you want to keep, okay? Because I have found often that you know, the wheel here, these E-rings, even the screws in the back, they can get lost pretty darn easily. And when they come out, you lose the pin, you lose the linkage, then you're grounded for a while, and you know, who wants to go find that stuff? So anyway, here's a really quick, if you guys have seen my videos, you guys have seen me do this a whole bunch of times before, but might as well just show you again. All I do, guys, is just take the tip of this thing, and if you have one of the more precision tips that come with these foam tacks here, then it's just this simple. Just get a little bit of foam tack on the end here, and you can see here I'm going to just put it right around the edge of that E-ring, and you want it to stick. Even if a little string like that comes off, that's okay. The way that you get rid of that is you lick your finger, or you just get some moisture on your finger very carefully, and it won't stick to your finger. If you don't moisten your finger a little bit, then it will stick to your finger. But you can see how nice this turns out. And then you just let this dry, leave it alone, try to go do something else while this is drying, otherwise you'll probably touch it again as you're working on the model. But if you put a little round, just a little round dome over that thing, what it'll do is it'll dry, it'll keep your E-ring in place, and you won't lose it. So even as I'll put that on the wheel hub as well a little later, and then I'll also put them even around these screws right here, guys. That'll keep these little ones from coming off of here. And again, even if you get a little string there, just kind of wet your finger there a little bit. Somebody's trying to call me and bother me while I'm doing my video shooting here. It's not cool. But if you just wet your finger with something and just tap on that, you'll end up with a really nice glue joint that'll hold that thing in place. And the best thing about doing this thing is that after these dry, if you still need to take that E-ring off, you can just peel this foam tack off after it's dry. Just peel it off and then do your maintenance or whatever you have to do. And then if you want to, put foam tack back on it again, and that'll just keep it. It's kind of like a Poor Man or a rubber version of safety wire. It just keeps everything in your landing gear or anywhere you have an E-ring, it just keeps it all together. Last but not least is the missile package on this airplane. It's actually a pretty nice missile and hardpoint package. It goes on pretty easy. There's just a bag of screws right here. And the real Tomcat could carry up to 4 Phoenix missiles, I believe, but to put them back here, we would block the cooling ports. So they just put the 2 up front, and you got sidewinders and sparrows and their hard points. These go on pretty easily, folks. Just 2 screws right here. These slide off pretty darn easily. You can see the same missile rail that I used for the back ventral fins, but all you do is line those holes up. You put 2 screws in there, they self-tap right into the plastic, and it's really nice. You have the same slide connector right here to join those in place, and you got 2 Phoenix missiles on there. The sidewinders and sparrows, I'll go ahead and zoom in and show you how those go on. That's a really nice arrangement, very, very scale how they did it, and it connects to the thing really, to the airplane really well. You see here as I pull this off, I just have these loosely mounted. You can see you have 3 points, but there's only 2 screws here. And just like I showed you in the beginning here when I demoed this, you just push these forward and you can see they come right off. So it's just a really nice hard point. And then you go ahead and you take these on, you just pop them down into place, and they actually are a very snug, no doubt, a nice CAD type fit. And then you have 2 screws that go right in there. So really nice overall, guys, as at the very least, just an awesome static display. You can fly with these, of course, but I would recommend fly the plane first a few times. You know, get used to it, because when you put missiles on the airplane, it adds a lot of drag. That requires a lot more thrust. More thrust means less flight time. So better off flying it clean for a while. The drag from the missiles actually does help you slow the airplane down a little bit, so it does have that advantage. But it also uses more thrust to keep these in the air. So I'm going to fly mine clean the first few times, then we'll probably throw some weapons on there and give you guys a weapons demo flight. But really nice ordnance package all the way around. Okay, folks, that pretty much concludes this video on FREEWING's F-14D Tomcat coming from Motion RC. This is one impressive airplane. It assembled fantastic. You can put this thing together stock and go fly it, and it's very easy for almost anybody to put this thing together. I'm impressed that such a complex airplane was so easy to get everything together. It just really screws together. And then the cool thing is that the actual mixing of the ailerons and elevators and everything was really easy to connect to the receiver. Literally with 6 wires went in there. I did change my nose wheel steering like I talked about, and put the nose wheel steering into a separate channel so I could you know, trim my nose wheel while I'm taxiing. But the way this airplane went together, all the prefabricated work that was done, where you just install the verticals, or you install the nose cone, then the verticals, the tails, and the wings, and the ventral fins, and you're pretty much done. Just glue on some details like the little tracking probe up front and your pitot tubes and stuff. But this plane went together so well, and it was not a hassle. The wiring complex area in the back looks complicated, but it's really not. It's a very well-built airplane. So I'm impressed with this thing, and I really can't wait to get it out to fly it. If you guys have not seen the unboxing video where I go into a lot of detail on this airplane, I'll try to put the link at the end or below the video. I'll try to put some links below to kind of see where you guys can get this at Motion RC. But real nice airplane, dying to fly it. Can't wait to get it out there. Be checking for the flight demo videos coming soon, guys. Appreciate you watching RC Informer, and as always, we'll see you next time.